Hi, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Family Food Show. I'm your host, Katie Ferraro. I'm a dietitian and I'm a mom of 5 kids, and I have been talking all about infant feeding in the last couple of weeks.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of
one
the
thing I wanted to
Fortified
say
Family Food Show. I'm your
is
host,
that
Katie Ferraro. I'm a
we've been
dietitian
talking a
and
lot
mom of
about
5
gagging,
kids.
okay? And gagging is a major concern of parents. They are worried about, is their kid going to be choking, and what's going on, what's the difference between gagging, and I've heard all of your feedback. So I want to let you know that I brought an awesome guest on this week, and I'm so excited. She's an expert in infant feeding, so she's going to teach us everything that we need to know about the difference between gagging and choking, and a little bit about just safety when we're starting to feed our kids. So now, if you are starting to feed your kids, I want to let you guys know about a great resource that I created for you. If you go to this website, firstfingerfoods.com, you can download the top 10 of my favorite finger foods for starting baby-led weaning. So go and check that out at firstfingerfoods.com. And then also, if you guys can put comments in your questions in comments below, I'll go through those, and then even if I can't get to them on the live, we'll be back in the comments afterwards, and I'll get any feedback from Dawn if necessary to answer your guys' questions. So I've got a lot of great questions that have come in over email, and check out firstfingerfoods.com, but I want to tell you a little bit about our guests. So this is Dawn Winkleman. You guys, she is a feeding expert and she's a speech therapist, and she has a private practice called Spectrum Speech and Feeding. And in her private practice, she works all with families of children who have feeding disorders, but also she works with families of children that have picky eating. So she knows a lot about the different ways to help prevent picky eating, also the management of picky eating. But since we're going to be talking a lot about the introduction of solid foods, we're going to start with all of the stuff related to gagging, because that is certainly the number one objection that I hear from parents. So with no further ado, I want to introduce you guys to Dawn Winkleman, and Dawn is, again, our guest from Spectrum Speech and Feeding. So, hi Dawn, welcome. I know we had a little bit of audio trouble before, so I appreciate you hanging in there.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, tell me a little bit about where you've been in the last couple of weeks, because I know you are like a traveling fool.
Yes, so I work for a company called Easy Peasy, and we make feeding products for children. And I went with the team to the JPMA baby show, and then did some speaking engagements there for several feeding boutiques, as well as a couple of universities and hospitals. And then I did that traveling all the way in the West Coast, and then flew to the East Coast for the New York baby show, because I also work with an amazing young man named Jamie Grayson, the baby guy, and he was the speaker at the New York baby show, and I was on a feeding panel of experts there, just speaking about feeding and answering questions for parents that are struggling with solids, and kind of like what we're doing here today.
Cool.
So I've kind of West Coast, East Coast.
Is it like baby show season or something? Because I feel like you guys have all been all over the country this month. Like, is this when babies are born, or what's the deal?
Yes, I think everyone's getting ready for spring, and just, and which comes with a whole bunch of different challenges with, feeding. So, kids are out more, and they're eating more, and they're having more snacks, and, we have pool time eating and picnic eating, and I just think it's a really hot topic right now. So it's this is perfect timing.
Okay, so do allergies play a role in that? Because I know, like, my kids are just like constantly snotty all the time right now, and I just noticed that they're not eating as much food as they normally did, and I'm like, is it allergies, or what is it? Does that play in?
Actually, that really goes with our topic about gagging. The more congested we are, we have our nasal cavity and our oral cavity, and there's only one little, bony prominence between the two that, really keeps all of our nasal secretions and our oral secretions separate. But when we're congested, we have allergies, even if it's seasonal allergies. I mean, all of that really starts playing into gagging, because the more mucus you have, the thicker it is, the more mucus that builds up, the more likelihood that you're going to gag. So it just makes you not feel as good to want to eat, because you're really, more that we eat, the more saliva it produces, and the more likelihood that saliva is going to get caught on that growtiness from the allergies.
Okay, cool. So I know like that you know everything about gagging. So I'm a registered dietitian and you're a speech language pathologist. And one thing that we always talk about, you know, whenever you're working with feeding is that this is a multidisciplinary approach. Like no one specialty is equipped to know everything about feeding. So I just want to say how much I really appreciate you being on here with our audience, because we talk a lot about nutrition and like what are the foods that we should feed. But we're also always so interested in the overarching concept of how you feed, because you don't need to get so bogged down in what it is that you're feeding. How we feed our kids is so important. And so we talk about the importance of family meals and trying to introduce our kids to wholesome foods from the get-go to help establish these healthy eating patterns. But one thing I always hear from parents is like, list your biggest objections to starting or progressing with solid foods, and they always say it's gagging. And so I think we have this like negative connotation associated with gagging. So I was wondering if you could just do us a favor and tell us a little bit about the gag reflex, what it is, how it changes, you know, when our baby starts solid foods, to just give our parents a little bit of peace of mind, knowing, as the title of our video says, that gagging is actually a good thing.
Yes. So I think the fear comes from gagging leads to choking or vomiting. And that's a big deal. We know research shows that if kids gag a lot, kids vomit a lot, kids choke, they're not going to eat. So I think that the media just kind of plays that all the time just to make sure that babies are safe. I think it comes from a good place, but sometimes we put this fear in parents where, you know, I work with clients that, you know, only want to breastfeed till they're 3 years of age because they're so fearful. So I think it gets parents stuck in this fear mindset and knowing the facts, which is why I'm just so grateful that we're doing this, because it really, the accurate information needs to get out there. So basically what a gag is it's a reflex. And just like the rooting reflex, when we rub on a child, these reflexes are there to help a baby learn how to feed and help a baby to learn how to eat. But there's growing pains in that. So the gag is basically there to keep the airway safe and to help baby make sure that they're learning how to chew foods eventually, swallow foods, suckle foods, and be able to do that safely. So I tell parents it's a natural reflex and we want it. Because I've worked with kids that don't have a gag reflex, and those are the kids that have the most difficulties.
Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about identifying feeding difficulties in a second. Could you explain maybe a little bit about how, like, earlier in the baby's life, the majority of the tongue would initiate the gag reflex, but when does that start to recede, and how is that kind of tied in with when we introduce solid foods?
Yeah, so from a developmental perspective, the gag is very close because we want that reflex to be very quick to respond. So as we start to introduce foods, the farther back the gag reflex goes in the tongue. The things that change with that is if you keep your baby healthy, which is where you come into play, is, you know, having those healthy foods, giving them those great solid introductions. And the more that we do that, the more that the child introduces those foods, the farther back the gag is going to go. And by 9 months of age, it should be back to a normal position where you can start to accept solid foods and be able to advance more in your solid textures.
Okay.
So it's developmental.
But so that I'm curious about that 3 month gap, right? We generally talk about waiting, and we've done a whole series on, you know, why it's wise to wait when we start solid foods. And if you are starting solid foods, we talked about the importance of incorporating purees along with different textures. But for families that are starting some solid foods at the 6 month mark, if that gag reflex doesn't really recede until, you know, closer to the 9 month mark, we're dealing with about a 3 month period, if I'm just speculating here, where babies might gag more than they would a little bit later down the road. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, that is. And if you're going from, you know, breast or bottle straight to baby led weaning, and we're having a lot of gagging, then I tell parents to go back, do a few purees. You can still do it. You can still take that avocado and dump it into some applesauce, but let baby be able to learn how to suck that.
Okay.
So with some kids, it's just the dip. They suck the puree, that little bit of applesauce. They get that swallow reflex motion going. We've got a couple of swallows at the practice, and then they're fine.
Okay, you say a lot of gagging, and I know people are going to ask questions. What is a lot of gagging? Because, like, for the first time you feed a baby, if they gag once, I'm like, oh my God, that's too much. You know, what's a lot?
So I like to say that too much gagging is when we start seeing signs. So eyes start watering, nose starts watering. When we're having other signs and symptoms that's causing issues for the mealtime. But if it's one gag, two gags, you know, we're just going to let that gag go ahead and let them try that. And we can even make it the change. So like I said, taking that avocado and dipping it into some applesauce or putting a little bit of more salt on there. We're going to change that texture a little bit to try to help with that gag.
Okay, cool. So can you talk about how gagging differs from choking? Because I think parents a lot of times mistakenly use those terms interchangeably. And what I kind of want to do is to help promote the conversation that gagging is a good thing. Choking is obviously not a good thing. And we've talked about the importance of taking a refresher infant CPR course. Like most parents do that before their baby's born, but then, 6 months down the road, like I can't remember what I did yesterday. Like you need a refresher course to know about CPR and know about choking. But would you just remind us the difference between gagging and choking and like confirm that they are different?
So if I'm still going to be on audio, but I'm going to just give you a very ugly picture
Okay.
of what the difference is between gagging and choking. So choking is usually this picture. And they're stuck. They're usually frozen and they don't know what to do and they're fearful and parents fearful. And that's usually you see choking, you don't hear choking.
Okay.
So that's what I like parents. That's why I want parents to be there at the mealtime when we're doing baby-led weanies, because we want to make sure that we see that. A gag is usually more vocal. So the tongue is starting to protrude forward. So you can hear that. The tongue is moving forward. The soft palate, which is in the very back of the mouth, there starts to move up, and the jaw is moving down. So all of these structures are moving, and you can kind of hear the sounds, whereas choking is usually, and it's not, you're not hearing it.
Okay, I think that's a really important differentiation because like I did not know that the first time I went to feed my baby, and you hear them coughing, so that's when you like go to jump in, but if you hear it, you guys, that's a good thing. So
Yes.
I have another question that came from another follower who's saying, is it wise to interfere or intervene when your baby is gagging? Because she had said she'd heard like, don't intervene and let the baby work it out on their own. Like you getting involved could actually make it worse and actually induce choking. I mean, I know that's like not probably going to happen, but what do you think?
Yeah, so it's basically how we intervene. So I've been in a session where, mom is, oh my God, are you okay? And what happens is that if we overreact and and the child sees us kind of stressing out, what's the first thing baby's going to do? And they take that deep breath, and now a gag turns into a choke. So that piece of food that was in the mouth and in the tongue, and they were working it out through the gag reflex, and the piece of food's here, and they're trying to work that out. Now they just took that deep breath, and now it goes down.
Okay, so not interfering or not intervening for a typical gag is advisable.
Well, it's how you intervene.
Okay.
So I like to say you can communicate. You got this, Johnny. You're doing okay. Go ahead, swallow it down. You get that. That is a positive intervene. But it's hard at that moment because you're fearful. But I always tell parents, if you're cutting the foods up safely, it's a safe chop. You're chopping that up. It's a safe chop. You can communicate with the child, let them know what they're doing, so we can tell them swallow. Or if Johnny's tilting their head back, put your head down, because the more that the head is down, the more it closes off the airway and opens up the way to the esophagus. So if Johnny's like this, we can talk him through. Johnny, put your head down, if the child can follow those directions. Or we can take one finger and kind of help assist that. Go ahead, swallow, you got this. So being able to react, but react in a positive way.
Okay, so regarding the interactions, it's important, obviously, to trust your baby's ability, provided that they're, generally, I know you don't like using the term healthy, but we've talked about this in the past. But let's say you have a baby who does not have an identified feeding disorder, and you trust your baby's instinct and their ability to really deal with the gag themselves.
Right.
Regarding the interaction, I have a question from another reader who said, I don't know how to explain to my husband that gagging is good. So like obviously feeding is something, a lot of times moms are involved, but there's caregivers, there's grandparents, for all sorts of textures. How do you recommend that the one person involved in feeding who maybe is a little bit aware about these really important things that you're talking about, like gagging, like how do they speak to their partner about like, listen, this is an important part of learning how to eat, because the other partner jumps in and is like, I can't handle this, we're going back to breastfeeding.
Right. I usually like to, so if I'm working with the family, I usually like to have as many feeders as possible in the moment, which obviously is in a perfect world. But basically what I say to moms, because it's usually the moms that are telling the dads, then I say use us as an expert. Katie was telling us online that or Miss Dawn was telling us online, I took this class and they said this, and we're going to try it, and we're going to try it together. Instead of saying, the baby never gags with me when I'm feeding them.
Yeah.
It's right. It's that being able to communicate. But I like to have dads specifically be in the feeding process and tell them, hey, same thing. If you're hearing it, you're doing okay, and we're trying this new food, or trying one food, and I'm not sure what you recommend too, Kate, but trying one food for a week or one food for a month. And so we can, let's say we're introducing, cut half blueberries, that they had some of those blueberries this morning and they did great, Dad. I don't think he's going to have any problems choking. Why don't you try a few for lunch? And Dad's doing lunch.
Okay,
so
yeah.
letting him know in advance that they did fine with that texture.
Okay, so I have a question that's actually a personal question. So regarding growing out of gagging, so I have quadruplet babies and they're 16 months now. I hate that they're not even babies, they're toddlers. But one of my babies, Henry, he was the last to start eating, the last to sit up, the last to roll over. I mean, he's just a little bit slower and it's fine. It took him a few more weeks than the other babies to get interested in feeding. He still gags on foods that I'm like, seriously, dude, you're gagging on that? Like, not like banana, but for example, the freeze-dried snap peas, the ones with no added sodium, I give it to him sometimes to like play around with if I'm behind and getting the meals ready. I literally still can't give them to him at 16 months. He's never had a choking episode, but he does still gag. Is there an age when you would expect a baby to grow out of gagging, and is that maybe a sign of a feeding problem?
Well, yeah, it definitely, so just his history already has kind of let us know, like, he's going to be a couple weeks to a month behind the rest of the crew here. So we just need to be a little bit more patient, or we might want to have you do a one-on-one snack time with him. And so in that one-on-one snack time that, the other kids don't need right now, but he might need a little bit more support. And so what you can do is you can take that snap pea as a perfect example. I'll use a chew toy as an illustration, and you can start working that. If he keeps putting the snap pea here on the front of the mouth, you can work on helping him guide that to the side where his teeth will eventually be, and start to have him chew like this. And then that tongue has to come to the side. Okay. And that's going to start to decrease the gag. So I always recommend to parents, if you have a kid that just needs a little bit more assistance, take a snack time with them by themselves and kind of work on that skill set.
Okay. Is there, as far as age goes, I remember when we had met separately, you and I were talking about, you have these kind of nice guidelines. I know not all children are created the same, but regarding the introduction of textures, you were saying things like you like to see X, Y, or Z texture by a certain month.
Right.
Do you have any guidelines like that for parents? I know we all are always comparing ourselves, but just to give parents peace of mind that if my baby's not doing X, Y, or Z by this month, I should be concerned.
Yes, I like to introduce a variety of solids by 9 months.
Okay.
So and really the 9-month mark it's just because we have so much research that says that if kids don't have that experience and that exposure that early, not at 6 months, but at 9 months, then we can start having some picky eating behaviors. And basically the fallback is to be primarily breastfed or bottle fed, which again, I support a family's decision on whatever they decide to do, but I tell them about the research too. You can still breast or bottle feed, but we want to get those snacks in and we want to get some exposure and introduction of those things. So I like to have a variety of textures by 9 months of age to be able to kind of give that palate. We have this mouth that's just growing and developing, these taste buds that are growing and developing. We want to hit it at that point in time.
Okay, cool. So can you talk a little bit about the little device that you just had? I'm so fascinated by the whole different world of speech therapy, of different tools, etc. What about these toys? I've heard about toys that can be used to help a baby practice chewing, swallow, and breathing at the same time. Do you advocate for the use of any of those? I think they're called sensory chew toys, and should those be things that parents are looking into? And if so, in what cases?
Yes, that's a really great question because I think they're underutilized. I think a lot of families don't know about that. And this is a chewy tube, and you can get a variety of these types of toys online. But what I love about it is that there's different textures on each side. So this is a long, think of like French fry. Then we've got a thicker knobby piece. And I will take my fingers and hold that. So if I'm working on this with a child, so let's say we're crumbling up some of those snap peas and I'm crumbling up that texture, having the child lick this or putting a little bit of water on it and rubbing those crumbs in there and then putting that on their back molar, letting them have that little bit of taste, especially if parents are a little bit nervous about solids. And you could say, hey, this kid has this reflex. This is another reflex that they have. So now I know my kid has a gagging reflex. I know they have a tongue reflex to foods. I'm going to feel so much safer about adding in, solid foods. So I like these chew toys because we can, manipulate the gums, start to be able to use that, and then the teeth can erupt a little bit earlier too. So then we really start, helping with its parents' fears, because now we have some teeth to be able to do that. It also helps to move the gag back. So if we're putting it here and they start to gag, we're not ready to put it here. So we can slowly but surely start to, hold on to this and use that gag reflex. And then also, there's no parts on this that's going to pop off for baby. So I see some chewing teething toys that actually break off, and it's a choking hazard.
Okay, so that's called, is it called a chew toy?
It's called a chewy tube.
Chewy tube, you guys. Okay, not chew toy, a chewy tube. Okay, so that's a great tool, and it's okay for all types of kids to use, or would you have to suspect a feeding disorder before you use that?
I use this with all kids, especially kids that are learning to transition. It's just a nice, safe way to be able to hold on to something.
Can you talk a little bit about things that parents should look for if they do suspect that there's a feeding disorder? Not to do any fear mongering or freak people out, but it is a question that I get, and I know in your field, you guys have some really amazing statistics about what percentage of kids actually do have feeding disorders. Could you speak maybe a little bit about that?
Sure. So I tell families that you're not alone. If you have a kid that is experiencing some signs and symptoms, which are they're not gaining weight as often, they're not growing as often, they don't have a variety of textures, they don't have a variety of tastes, they don't have a variety of food groups. So these are my kids that are just stuck in carbohydrates that just kind of melt in their mouth, and they're not eating fruits or vegetables or meat. That becomes a feeding problem. And so picky eating is something that we, and as speech pathologists say, that they're still eating a variety of foods, a variety of tastes, but they just have some picky eating habits. So maybe they need to have it on this certain plate, or maybe there needs to be ranch dressing on everything, but they're eating a wide range of fruits and vegetables and meats, or any types of protein. And our problem feeders are not having that range, and they're really struggling to kind of keep up with the rest of the crew. And so sometimes I say, maybe you just need a week or two of feeding therapy, or you need a consultation with a registered dietitian or a speech pathologist, and just kind of get a little boost of some things that you can work on. It doesn't have to be 5 days a week of any type of therapy. It can just be a boost to just kind of help that child along.
Okay, and I like that you mentioned it might just be a few weeks, because I think that really freaks parents out. Like, oh, my kid needs to be in therapy. It's like, no. Meet with the therapist, the speech language pathologist. Their specialty is in infant feeding, and they will give you the tips and tools. And just like with physical therapy, you would go home and you would have to practice that with the family, with the tools. It's not the end of the world. And I love that you said that we really watch growth trends, because that's the same exact thing in nutrition. We start to get concerned when your baby is falling off the path, right, off the growth chart. Maybe they always were 5th percentile like all my kids are, but as long as they stay there, that's good. If they start to drop, that's when we get concerned. So again, we don't want to freak parents out, but it is important to know that there are specialists that can help you, and sometimes you just need a little bump, and so people like Dawn are here for you to do that. So could you speak, I want to wrap it up relatively soon, but I'm getting now a lot of questions. So talk a little bit about pouches. I know this is not a pouches and purees segment, but parents are really interested in pouches, and I know they've heard from speech language pathologists that we don't need pacifiers, we don't need sippy cups, and we don't need pouches. And like, as a non-speech expert parent, like, that stuff blew my mind. Like, why are they all out there then? Do you have a kind of pat answer you can give to us on that?
Yes. So basically, if you do, pouches or pacifiers, we just do them for a short period of time, or it's just for one solution. What happens is that, and the reason why we are so against them from a medical community, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, pediatricians, is because we see the overuse of these products. They have their place. Pacifier is there to soothe the child, but it's not there to be in the mouth all day long. Or I'm going into a school and I'm pulling out all these pacifiers in the kindergarten classroom, like, they're not supposed to have that then. So it's a soother. So it's something that will gently help a child fall to sleep, and then you're taking that pacifier out. A pouch is for something that, you're in a car ride and you're driving for 2 hours and your child needs a little bit of a homemade smoothie, and you're going to use that pouch, but it's not a daily thing. And what I'm seeing is, families that come to me and they're like, they have good nutrition, they're good on their weight, they're eating 9 pouches a day, like that's a problem.
Well, that's $18 a day. Like I can't even afford that.
Exactly. Exactly. And the biggest thing from a speech and language standpoint, as well as a feeding standpoint, is that it keeps the tongue in this position. And so they're never going to transition to really good, healthy, solid foods because their tongue is in a reflex that's still in a very immature swallow. We need the tongue to be back here. And so it takes a long time. And those kids that tend to have that suckle pattern for longer periods of time tend to be very picky and tend to not eat vegetables and not eat proteins and just eat fruits and carbohydrates.
Okay.
So that's the fear.
And I love that you're talking about the different textures because we're actually going to be doing a 5-day texture challenge next month to help parents with creative ways to start introducing and transitioning these different textures because it is, it's hard as a parent. You're like cruising along for 6 months, breast milk or buttermilk, like no big deal, I got this. And then this whole solid food thing starts and you're like, I need different tastes, I need different textures, some spoon fed, hopefully some baby led feeding somewhere down the road. So we want to help parents learn about the different textures and not to stress out about it, not have to be buying all these expensive foods for babies that, to be honest, in my practice, I see a lot of parents who keep their kids on purees for too long. I think purees are very important. You told me that a third of your caseload is actually kids who started with baby-led weaning who never got to the point where they could tolerate purees. So we do have certainly value the importance of purees, but it's not the only texture out there, and your kid does not need to be on straight purees for 6 months.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I have a question from Jara, if you don't mind. She's asking me, what about a silent gag? My son will make the gag face without the sounds. Is there such thing as silent gag?
Yes. So that's and usually I don't bring that up because it even complicates.
I know you don't want to freak people out, but it's her question.
That's great. So there's a silent gag and there's silent aspiration. So basically, if I was to drink my coffee here and it was to go down the wrong way, and it was go down into my lungs, I would cough and have watery eyes and really gag on that and try to get that coffee to come back up and come back into my oral cavity and re-swallow it. A silent gag and silent aspiration is that the child does not make any sounds that food went down into the lungs. That they're gagging, but they're not making any voicing during that. So that is true. It's very rare, but it can happen. And so then it really looks like choking because remember I said before, it's like you want to hear it. It really looks like choking. So again, what we'd want to do with that particular child is utilize some of these tools. And what I love about a chewy tube is you can see the hole in there. It's easy to clean, but you can stick a little bit of food in there. And when they're biting on this and you're holding this very safely and a little piece of food comes out. So let's say we shove a little bit of a snap pea in there and a little piece comes out, they're able to manage that. A little piece comes out, they're able to manage that. So you're able to do that. And you can do it with a straw too and shove a little bit of food in the straw and manage that and help this child be able to start to show that gag that may be more audible and be able to position that appropriately. It's very rare, and so that mom is on it. Good job, Mom.
That's good. I mean, I wanted to ask her a question because it is yes. Something we don't see all the time, but it's still important to know about these things, I think, because they can happen, but to know that they're exception, not the rule. So I have one final question from Taryn. She's asking about foods not to feed your baby. We've talked about it from a nutrition standpoint, but just from a food safety standpoint, what foods do you recommend avoiding for babies, let's say like in the 6 to 9 month old range, if you can't answer that?
So things that are round, we always hear about grapes and people stay away from grapes, but then I'm like, but there's cherries and there's olives and things that are round that still get stuck. But we think that the cherries are a little bit smoother, a grape is a little bit harder, and olive is, a lot of my families really want kids to eat olives because there's some studies that say that it's going to help expand a palate. And so, but they don't cut them because they think that they're so soft, but they're still round. So anything that's round, anything that's clumpy. So if we're taking like peanut butter sandwiches and it kind of clumps up and can get stuck into the airway. So we want to have manageable pieces. And again, I'm not trying to freak parents out of saying don't give your kid a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's just that they're taking a bite and then they're taking another bite and then another bite. And these are kids that are learning how to chew and swallow. And you look into their mouth and there's a whole clump there. We need to make sure that they swallow that bite and then we're offering them another one. So that's why I like to cut things up into small pieces, just like baby-led weaning says, but also to make sure. So only give like 2 or 3 pieces and at a time so the child can self-feed, but look for those clumps because that's what they can choke on. And then I think hard. So I have some families that give cashews because they think it's a softer nut, but it's a hard nut. And so these are kids, again, that just don't have a lot of experience, and a cashew can be very tricky.
Exactly. We've got a lot of resources for parents because we're getting so many questions about nuts, changing in guidelines. Earlier introduction of peanuts appears to be protective against peanut allergy, but you cannot feed clumps of peanut butter and whole intact nuts to younger babies. Certainly older babies can handle smooth peanut butter spread out maybe on a whole wheat pancake or something like that, but don't stress yourself out to start. There's a lot of other really innovative ways that you can introduce peanut and nut protein to your babies without increasing their choking risk, because we have to balance things here. We want our babies to learn how to eat and not have food allergies, but we don't want to put them at risk. So Dawn, I cannot thank you enough. I know you're like the busiest person in the feeding world, and it is so generous of you to share your time and all of your information with our guests. So you guys, I want to just remind you, this is Dawn Winkleman from Spectrum Speech and Feeding. You can check her out on Facebook and on Instagram at Spectrum Speech. She's an incredible resource. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And just, do you have any final tips for our parents just to help them get over that fear of gagging that you can leave us with?
No, I think the biggest thing is to trust your mommy gut. Is trust your mommy gut and also trust your child's ability to work through some of these issues. So you can do it.
Yeah, trust yourself. You guys got this, and gagging is good, right, Dawn?
Yes, gagging is very good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you guys all next week. We're going to be talking all about textures. We're going to have a texture talk to kind of lead on with some of these things that Dawn introduced us to. So have a nice afternoon or evening wherever you are, and thank you again for joining the Fortified Family Food Show.